I'm Hilary Robertson. Welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World. This time I'm joined by sax player and composer Jon Gordon, whose latest recording is out now. Jon takes his nonette into a new album called Stranger Than Fiction. And this is all about the truth. I'm really looking forward to my conversation with Jon, and I hope you enjoy listening to it. Welcome to Harmonious World. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, Stranger Than Fiction. First of all, I'd like you to tell me about the title, because it's a really interesting. I love the ethos behind the album and behind the title.
Well, thank you. Oddly enough, I didn't write it in the past few years. I wrote it about 20 years ago, where I think it had more to do with things in my personal life where I just was in a kind of place that I had not expected. And I also wrote that piece Havens at around that time. And then I did a nonette plus strings and percussion and vocals, sort of a large ensemble, almost like a chamber ensemble kind of project in '09. And I knew I wanted to do another one, at some point. And really, I just honestly didn't have the opportunity to do it until the last couple of years. And as I was planning it, I was thinking about those pieces. And I really felt that they really spoke to the time, certain things that had gone on. I remember I was, around in the 90s. I've had a couple of conversations about this in recent weeks about my thinking with the record and different inspirations with it. But I think I naively felt like, well, okay, America has a troubled past, but Mandela is free, and the president of South Africa. We're dealing with the hole in the ozone layer. Like, it just felt like some of these really big world structural problems that there was actually. It felt like, okay, it was a relatively hopeful time in my mind. But I've been concerned about a lot of things I've been seeing over the last 20 years that I think have really come to the fore, particularly in the United States, but really around the world. And it really has to do with, and I've experienced it in various communities, in individual relationships in various communities that I'm in, and then, sort of on the micro and macro level in my country of origin, and just in the world, like. How we deal with certain things, and if we don't have reality, if we don't have something approaching a shared view of reality. I mean, not that anyone is the single arbiter of facts and what is good and bad, but if we don't, to have democracy, to have participation, we have to all agree on, or something approaching agreeing on these are the concerns, this is what's really happening. Otherwise, it's everybody goes into their own little corner and says, well. Maybe a virus that's killed almost 700,000 people in the United States isn't real. And, what do you do with that? I don't know. But that kind of, yeah, I mean, that's just one example of it. But yeah, so the truth really has kind of been stranger than fiction to me in recent years, and things that I never expected. I think Donald Trump became the president in The Simpsons like 20 years ago. Briefly, that was an episode. And to think that would actually become reality was beyond anything I was capable of imagining.
Right. And I think in the UK, I mean, as you say, there's lots of examples of this around the world. But I think here in the UK, most of us didn't imagine for one moment that Brexit would get voted for. We all imagined that, why would we give up this wonderful relationship we've got with Europe? And we all knew, well, we thought we all knew that it would make life more difficult. It would only make life more difficult. So therefore, why would you do it? And of course, that's what's happened. And actually, the reality is stranger than fiction here, because if you walk into any supermarket now, there are empty shelves. And no longer can people say that it's because of COVID, because it's not. It's because of Brexit, because there's this trouble with lorry drivers going backwards and forwards across the channel. It's bad.
Yeah, and it seems that whole thing was very similar to certain things that happened with people like Steve Bannon and Nigel Farage, and there seems to I don't know. It seems to have been an extremely effective intelligence operation, in my opinion. Who am I? I'm just a guy, right? But it feels like, there's been a very effective obscuring of reality for the
Yeah,
purposes of basically turning people against each other, turning people that, within a country, within various alliances. And that's on that macro level, along with, like, we didn't really have the last 20 years to mess around with trying to deal with climate change, right? Like,
right.
like that's one of my things I've been saying for a long time. Like, hey, and it doesn't really matter if events kind of prove you right. Like, there's no petty win of like, hey, this is great. I've been complaining about this for 20 years, and it's like, no, nobody cares. So we're
No,
just in the state that we're in. But the next best time from 20 years ago to start paddling in the right direction and dealing with things, the best time would have been 20, 30 years ago. The next best time is now, and now is all we have. So I hope, I sometimes hope, perhaps naively, that we're going through some of these challenges, and it's almost like on a worldwide level, some of these things that we thought were done and gone 50 years ago, with some of these extremes, that seem to be channeled for political gain at this point. Hopefully, it is coming to the fore so that it can be healed. That is the most hopeful outlook we can have. But in the meanwhile, I mean, we just don't know what the coming years brings, and it could be a very bumpy ride on a lot of levels. And yeah.
yeah. This album is really, really interesting because sometimes it feels very, very modern and very free, and then other times it feels very melodic and harmonic, and it's your style is very unusual. Tell me where you think this is in terms
Hmm.
of jazz and whatever.
Well, I mean, I think of it as present and contemporary, but I mean, I love the tradition, like I love the whole history of the music. And I'm in my ninth year teaching here at Canada, but I'm originally, an Ecuadorian American, and I feel like jazz is the most important cultural contribution that America has made to the world. And I was around some incredible musicians who were incredibly kind and generous to me. I had a book come out last fall called Jazz Dialogues, which basically was a compilation of about 15 years worth of interviews and then stories going back to the 80s, with some of these folks, right? And so I love the whole history of it. I mean, I love Weather Report, I love Pat Metheny, I love John Schofield, I love Wayne Shorter, I love what Kurt Rosenwinkel and Mark Turner and Brad Meldau and people like that have done in the last 25 or so years. Ed Simon, a brilliant, brilliant Venezuelan pianist, I'm a big fan of. Luciana Souza. But I love feeling connected to the tradition. And one of my favorite musicians, one of my heroes, a guy named Scott Robinson. He's somebody that plays like 70 instruments, a great saxophonist, but he also plays brass instruments. And he plays the whole history of the music on all these instruments, and yet he always sounds like himself. And it's like a really just a incredible. I don't know anybody that's making kind of the contribution that Scott is, but I think I kind of hear music that way, where I've been lucky enough to play with people like Jay McShann and Al Gray and Roy Eldridge and Benny Carter and people, Red Holloway and Barney Kessel, people like that in my teens and 20s, and also with John Schofield and Maria Schneider and Mark Turner and the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra and Alan Ferber's not, and things that I love. That so I just love it all. So I think probably the hope is that Clark Terry had three words for jazz students. He said it's imitation, assimilation, innovation. And I think probably when you're listening to somebody, when you listen to Joe Henderson, who's one of my heroes, one of the great improvisers I ever heard live in my life, I always felt like I was hearing all those things simultaneously. The people that inspired him, his assimilation of it, and his innovation. So, and he's somebody I feel like, or Joe Lovano is another one where I just feel like you hear the whole history of the music in their playing.
Yeah, and that's interesting because that's exactly what I felt when I was listening to the tracks. That it's very modern, it's very you, and it's very individual, but it's also constantly, you can see where who's you can see the giants that you're standing on their shoulders, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a great way to put it, because one thing that I quoted in the book is I never worked with McCoy Tyner, but I got to meet him. I played with a group at the was it the Jazz Baltica Festival in 2001, and we were opening for McCoy Tyner, and there was like 45 minutes after our set, and Joel Fahm, the brilliant tenor player, and I sat and talked with McCoy for like 45 minutes. It was incredible, and he was so humble, and I said something about like, man, it's just amazing. You're such an important, such an amazing contributor, and your humility about all this. And he said, oh, I don't feel that way. I feel like we're all in it together, and I'm standing on the shoulders of thousands of people whose names you would never know, but without any one of them, I might not be here, you know? And I think that vision of that interconnectedness, which certainly brings you to more of a shared perception of reality and shared perception of priorities, is the one that I kind of embrace, you know, of like we're all in it together, you know,
Yeah.
and we all do stand on the shoulders of not only our families and friends and peers, but you know, in many regards in this world. So I think that's really important to remember.
Yeah, very good. Um, so each one of these tracks was composed by you, and obviously there's a lot of improvisation as well. How, and you, am I right in thinking that the recording didn't take place in a traditional, you were all in the recording studio together? It was done remotely.
Yes, essentially what happened is the rhythm section and myself recorded at Stereo Bus Recording in Winnipeg in early October of last year. And then we went back in and re-recorded a couple of tunes. It was a little complicated, but we had to rent a piano to bring in, and basically it just didn't work to do that. And so we went back in and just recorded quartet without piano. And on those tracks, we sent them to Orrin Evans in Philadelphia. But the original intention was to have myself, Jocelyn Gould on guitar, Will Bonis on piano, Fabio Orgnelli on drums, and Julian Bradford on bass on everything. And then we were going to have some guest soloists. But because of basically just a little technical glitch, we did a couple things. And I said, hey, Orrin, are you down to play on two tunes rather than one and play some, you know, some backgrounds and stuff? He said, great. Yeah, you know. So he was real loose and easy. And I was kind of debating in my mind, because I had recorded a previous record at Rudy Van Gelder's studio in New Jersey, which I'd never recorded there before. I'd had some opportunities, but it didn't quite happen. It's currently run by Don and Maureen Sickler. Maureen worked with Rudy for the last 30 or 35 years of his life and basically was mentored by Rudy, you know, as the most important jazz engineer in the recording studio in the history of the music. And so when he passed, he left the studio to Maureen and Don. And Don and Maureen happened to be my publishers of my music. And so I went out and spent a day there and recorded with a quartet, all original music. We just had a day. And I was thinking, I'd love to make this record at Rudy's. The problem was we were dealing with COVID protocols. And I didn't know, am I going to be able to get 9 people in a room to rehearse for a couple of days, let alone to record for a couple of days? And I thought, I think I can get 5 people, because I had done a recording with Will Bonis, the local jazz piano prof and a brilliant jazz pianist. And we did his record like a year earlier in 2019. And we were all in total isolation, which is unusual. But I thought that would work perfect for what we're dealing with, right? So we did it that way. And now Derek Gardner is also up here in Winnipeg, but we couldn't fit a 6th person. So he's like, I got my mic set up at the house, up, you know, just a mile or 2 away, and I'll just do it from home. And so the same thing was done with 3 former students, Reginald Lewis and Tristan Martinson, who played the tenor parts, and a Blackmore who played about half the bass clarinet parts. And then John Ellis, one of my favorite tenor and bass clarinet players in the world, played the other bass clarinet parts and played a solo. And I said, man, whatever you want to play the solo on, he played it on bass clarinet. And Alan Ferber. So John's in New York. Alan I knew from New York. Alan is currently in the last couple of years in St. Louis. So we were in St. Louis. Orrin's in Philly. You know, Derek's up here in Winnipeg. I recorded basically the six of us, including Derek and that original five, recorded all of our stuff up here. And then I think Reginald is doing his doctoral degree at the University of Illinois. So we were basically all over North America, but it came together.
It really, really does come together. The lines all interweave and everything. It's a really lovely. It's not an easy listen though, is it?
Well, I mean, I would say you put me in mind of a series of lectures I saw Leonard Bernstein give that became a book called The Unanswered Question. And it was basically, what does it mean to be an artist in the 20th century? So it was 1973. It was a series of lectures given at Harvard. They're actually all on YouTube. And it was about all art, but mainly music, but he dealt with poetry, he dealt with architecture, he dealt with linguistics. So I think there's projects I've done that are just kind of like, here's some tunes that I love, that are maybe like Bill Charlap and I did a duo record that was pretty much kind of that. It was produced by Phil Woods. We did it at his house, and that was the direction that Bill was going, and so that's where we kind of went. And actually, I'm hoping to do a record which is basically, something closer to that with strings in the next couple of years. But I just felt like with where the world is at and what I was feeling, there isn't. It's not always time for. Sometimes it's time for reflecting on challenging things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a really interesting concept at the moment. I interviewed this time last year, actually, I interviewed Maria Schneider about
Mhm.
data lords. And
Yes.
that, of course, is fabulous. I mean, the music is incredible, but where she's coming from, she doesn't care. I mean, she's a strong woman who's standing up for what she believes in. And the music is wonderful, but also the ethos behind it. And I get the same feeling with this. And I think making you think is a good thing. Making people think is a good thing. And I think sometimes that's where music can fall down, is that it goes for the easy option. It goes for the light and fluffy, whereas I like stuff that's a bit more deep.
Absolutely. I mean, and Maria is a hero and a friend, and I worked with her quite a bit in the '90s into maybe the mid 2000s, and I love her music. She's a big influence on how I think and how I write. And I had a lot of conversations with her about what she's talking about in the various ways that musicians have been kind of manipulated. I
Right.
remember 15 years ago there were all these strikes in New York because all the television screenwriters and everything went on strike. It said, well, we're not getting any of the money from the content of all the stuff that's being put on YouTube and social media and whatever else. Well, we're not sure if there's any money to be made from it yet. Well, you're putting money up on it and getting money. And I was in talks with the music union about that and certain related things. And I think it's a challenge for all artists, but I mean, particularly for musicians. I feel like sometimes we're standing on an island and we're down to like hopping on 1 foot of sand. There's almost a kind of a correlation with rising seas there, because it's like there used to be a lot of different ways you could make a living and make a contribution as a musician, and some of those ways are not there in the way that same way that they were, and the way the music is kind of controlled by these large corporations, and what Maria is talking about is absolutely, I mean, it's a huge issue for all artists, and it's something that I don't think most people are as aware of as they should be, and it's we kind of fall into a kind of Orwellian sleep around it of like, in the '90s or the early 2000s, we'd get called for record dates, and you'd go and play. I'd play play a club in Paris, and France Musique would pay me for radio rights, and I'd get publishing, and it's like, oh, that's just gone now, like or it's not there the way it was, especially in America. So I applaud because I've been aware of this direction in this conversation with her for quite a long time, and she's 100% correct in bringing forward those concerns.
Yeah, and using her position to say this is not right. And it's almost like she doesn't need to worry financially, probably, I don't know, but she's not doing it for her, she's doing it for all of the other musicians who don't have a voice.
Exactly. Right. So if somebody just asserts, I just own your stuff,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, like that's not right,
No.
and you have to negotiate with people. You have to treat people the way you want to be treated. I mean, I really feel like, and this thing of standing up when something is wrong is a big one in my own life, and on a lot of different levels. And if you may or may not be familiar, was a very important civil rights icon who also was a member of the House of Representatives named John Lewis
Oh
that
yeah.
passed away in the last year or so. And it's just a very simple principle. He said, if you see something that's not right, you have to stand up, you have to speak out, and you have to take action. And I think you know it, that is not looked upon well in certain cultures. It's like, hey, keep your head down, keep your mouth shut, collect your check. It's like, no, like there are certain things where like that's not fair, not only to us, but what about our students and the people following us? So Maria is 100% right, and that's the way we all have to think, not only about that issue, but like the world we're leaving to people, right? Like,
Yeah.
because the environment, I'm 54 years old, the environment today is vastly different from where it was 50 years ago. Now, there were certain things that were worse 50 years ago in terms of the amount of, toxins that were going into the air and certain things. And, coal in Great Britain was terrible at a certain point. We understand all that. We've made some progress, but, this is something we have to be vigilant about. And with truth and with trying to do the right thing, we can't go into a kind of hopeful sleep. I think we have to stay vigilant because I just think there's a lot of energy in the world that says, I'm going to take that and monetize it, and I don't care about anybody else. And that's kind of what, Maria is speaking to, or, I'm going to be abusive or take something or not respect others. And it's like, no, we gotta check each other to say, and it's not, we all make mistakes. You know, I'm not, no, there's no one person that's the arbiter of like what's good or bad or right or wrong, but you've got to be in a kind of communal discussion, at least to say like, because we're trying to evolve here, really.
Right. And also that's about trying to be informed, and it's about
Yes.
learning and reading and finding out about stuff rather than taking the easy option, of a newspaper headline and just taking that as fact without actually looking deeper. What was their source for that?
Yeah,
Quite often you see a newspaper article and it'll be based on a press release that's come from an organization that's got a buy-in. They've got a foot in the camp.
exactly.
Why are
Yeah,
we always listening to them?
exactly. And we have more exposure to information now than we've ever had in our lives, but the information is all over the map, and you have a kind of both sidesism in the media, which is like, well, on the one hand, people are saying that the world is round. On the other hand, some people are saying it's flat. Some people believe that gravity doesn't exist. And so there has to be some kind of arbitration of saying, like, look, viruses exist. You already take vaccines, and your kids to,
Yeah.
to be able to go to public school. Um, you know, like I just remember with the Brexit thing, how many hundreds of millions of pounds was spent putting ads on those iconic red buses saying you're going to save 627 billion pounds through Brexit, and then they got what they wanted. It's like, oh, that was a lie.
Yeah.
And there was no, and so there's a lot of that same kind of thing that's going on in the United States. It's like, oh well, I was just lying.
Yeah.
And well, some people are saying, somebody told me, and it's like, if we don't, as citizens and the media don't hold people accountable for that, because in some cases you're talking about huge things that shape world events and where hundreds of thousands of people die when they wouldn't have to in certain cases. And so, so this is obviously some of these things, some people are aware of what they're doing and what the escape hatches are. So I think we just have to be vigilant about saying like, no, like where's your facts indicating, you're going to take them? Who are the people that took those ads out? You're going to have to be responsible for putting misinformation on the British public, or same thing here in the States of like, pick your poison, Fox News or whatever else saying that vaccines, well, maybe vaccines, but I'm hearing bad things. It's like, really?
Yeah.
And then you've got, so it's I don't like to get too specific into all of that because I want people to just take from the situation whatever is meaningful to them. But for me, clearly, like that lack of perceived agreed upon reality creates a lot of openings for not the best actors, the Putins of the world, shall we say, the authoritarians, because when you don't have shared facts and shared reality, and I would mention to you the writings of Timothy Snyder. He had a book called Lessons on Tyranny. I think it was 20 lessons for kind of dealing with authoritarianism, and he's a brilliant writer and kind of saw where we were headed, quite in quite a prescient way, and his book is quite brilliant.
Thank you. I'll look that up.
I remember seeing Bonnie Raitt ask, because she was very political, right?
Yeah.
Somebody asked her in an interview, and I always loved the way she sang. And they said, well, why don't you sing things that are like more overtly political, like I think we can find some more of that in maybe some Joni Mitchell or some Paul Simon or Stevie Wonder, Living for the City as an example or whatever. And she's like, I feel like my contribution is still going back to those songs about interpersonal relationships and love and romance. And I feel like that's because there's a lot of different, there's things that make us reflect and things that make us feel and things that hopefully help us to heal. And in a perfect world, it's like when you go and see somebody give a great speech, like a great orator, make them laugh, make them cry, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in a perfect world, ideally, a great artist is somebody that's capable of doing all of that. But there are certain people that their contribution, maybe, is they're going to help you heal, and somebody else is going to make you think, and then certain people are trying to do several things simultaneously, and
Right.
or take you on that journey with all of that. So
yeah, and I think sometimes actually the people that do it best are the people who lull you into this, it's all about love and it's all about relationships, and then they hit you hard with something that is political and that's saying, no, let's not stand for this anymore, let's do whatever it is, and so, but we're all individuals, aren't we? Every one of us has our own individual story and our own individual way of being. And together we're amazing, and individually we're amazing, but we're not all the same, and I think that's a great thing.
George Carlin had a thing. He said, I love individuals. I'm not fans of groups. Sometimes groups of people get funny ideas and then they start wearing armbands and then come and roust you out of your house in the middle of the night. But individuals, he said, I feel like you can see the world, you see the universe in every individual's eyes, but groups of people, sometimes that's where stuff gets messed up,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it was an interesting take. He and George Carlin and Richard Pryor happen to be two of my heroes, non-musicians, right, who are big heroes of mine, and I think incredibly insightful about some of the things we're talking about, just about the human condition.
Thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting, and I've really appreciated your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Great to meet you, Hillary, and let's stay in touch. Maybe, hopefully, you'll be in New York, or I'll be over there, or our paths will cross.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's do that. Okay, thanks, Jon. Bye. I hope you enjoyed listening to my conversation with Jon Gordon about his latest album, Stranger Than Fiction. I began this podcast with the opening of Havens, and now you're listening to Bella. As always, do please check out Jon's music. The links are in the show notes. If you enjoy listening to Harmonious World, please share it with your friends and family. You can do that on social media or by just sending a link with a personal message, or even just talking about it. And if you can rate and review wherever you get your podcast, that would be fantastic. Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful week before the next episode hits. And please remember, share what you're good at and make this world a little more harmonious. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.